Good morning, everybody. Thanks everybody for attending the session today. So maybe just some opening remarks from me before we call the panelists up. So I've been on a journey advising on trade and investment since 1994, which has been a rather long and interesting journey. And last year I was a judge at an AGOA Exporter Awards event. And what that taught me was the real difference AGOA could make to exporters, small, medium, and large exporters. What was clear is trade agreements matter. I've also seen over many years for large exporters in the auto industry and large trade exposed industries who export to the US, to EU and the UK, trade agreements matter. Trade agreements also result in investment, and that has been clear. Trade results also in stronger local companies as they compete in open markets. AGOA matters because it creates forums like this, where we can get business and government together to talk and have an open dialogue and create opportunities for business. What we do know is the GDP of Africa is approximately $3 trillion US, with projections to get to 29 trillion by 2050. But we must remind ourselves that Africa accounts for 3% of global GDP. And His Excellency Wamkela Nene reminded me yesterday again that Singapore accounts for 6% by itself. So we've got a real challenge on our hands. So is it a rounding error for large multinational corporations? What does the USA see in Africa? Is it just the critical minerals? Is it the market, the size of the market? How can Africa play and work to our strengths and create a great team? And sorry, like the Springboks taught us. So obviously a Springbok analogy, sorry, I can't help myself. So can the three largest economies in Africa work together? South Africa, Egypt, and Nigeria work together like the Springbok front row did, okay, in winning the World Cup. They were the anchors for the team. Can these economies create an anchor for the rest of Africa for us to collectively export to the rest of the world? We've also got a large population, 1.4 billion, which accounts for 18% of the world population, expected to grow to 2.5 billion by 2050. The question, does it matter? How do we make it matter? By growing the African economies. That's where AGOA matters. The 5 main challenges we've identified by numerous stakeholders, we all know them. Challenging infrastructure, trade barriers, tariff barriers, policy instability, political instability, lack of regional integration. We've got too many trading blocks, and that's hopefully what the African Continental Free Trade Agreement can assist us with. And limited market access. Too small, the African markets are too small. So the African Continental Free Trade Agreement could assist with a few of these challenges. How do we increase our intra-regional trade, which currently sits at 13%, to get to levels of, like the EU sits at 68%, or Asia at 58%, or North America at 30%. So I've personally seen a lot of increased requests from international business over the last year or so, looking at investing in Africa due to supply chain disruptions, sustainability drivers such as critical minerals, and market opportunities. I've also seen some challenges in policy certainty and alignment in major markets, such as how the carbon border adjustment in Europe is impacting African exporters. How Section 232 duties in the USA impact our large exporters in aluminium and steel, and how we can leverage off the Inflation Reduction Act in America. The advent of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is aimed to create a more harmonized and unified regional and continental market, making it more feasible to set up cross-border broader value chains that can significantly expand the potential for exports to the US market. The African Union is looking to accelerate African manufacturing and industrialization through programs to prioritize value chains in manufacturing, agribusiness, health, and ICT. We welcome those developments, the African Growth and Opportunities Act, to be renewed. But can we have AGOA Plus? So that's really the objective of the panel today. I'm going to be calling up we've got panelists from major bank, South African headquartered companies who are also, we heard, large investors in the US. US headquartered companies who have got large presences in South Africa and Africa. So I'd like to call up British Robinson from Prosper Africa, Greg Poole from Children's Place, who's got a strong focus on textiles, Kenny Fila from Standard Bank, Tinswalo Siko Wambe from Pfizer, Cecilia Van Rooy from Amcham and Dow, David Makumela from Sasol, and Tabe Kasipe from the SACU Secretariat. So thanks everybody. I would like to start with British Robinson from Prosper Africa. I think, in your opening remarks, can you really speak to how regional trade can help businesses if they trade regionally in Africa? How can that help them access the US market? And just give us your opening remarks, and how do you think the African Continental Free Trade Agreement can work hand in hand with AGOA?
Well, thank you. Good morning, Excellencies, colleagues, business leaders, members of civil society, and the private sector, all protocols observed. I'm going to start actually with my full opening remarks because I have another bilateral meeting that I have to attend. So if you'll just indulge me for a minute, thank you. I'm British Robinson. I'm the coordinator of Prosper Africa. Prosper Africa is a U.S. presidential national security initiative to scale trade and investment between the United States and Africa. Prosper Africa takes a whole-of-government approach to reaching scale in order to strengthen our economic and strategic partnerships with the continent. I'm pleased to be here to discuss and be a part of the 2023 AGOA Forum. There could not be a more critical time in history of AGOA and its continued importance to the U.S. and African strategic objectives. AGOA is not just a piece of legislation. Let me take a minute to take a step back and bring it to ground. I want to talk about what AGOA implementation really means. Just yesterday, I had the privilege of touring our Prosper Africa partner, Regani Juice Factory, a South African company that is fast becoming a household name in the U.S. for carrot juice. There, I witnessed firsthand catalytic two-way trade and investment, where our support gave Regani Juice the opportunity to prepare for entry into the U.S. market, to attend the Fancy Food Trade Show in the U.S., then to meet a vetted U.S. distributor and sign a supply agreement worth $500,000 US. I asked the general manager of Regani what was the reason for their success. And his exact response, and I quote, is this: AGOA and trade promotion. Let me say that again. AGOA and trade promotion. Trade promotion without AGOA doesn't work. And AGOA without trade promotion doesn't work. But it doesn't stop there. This single AGOA-supported project created an entire trade ecosystem in Gauteng province. And sorry, but I have a little prop here. This small box of juice represents an entire AGOA value chain, ecosystem, and supply chain. Each box represents a supply of locally grown vegetables from neighboring farms, 250 processing jobs, mostly women, that pay twice the minimum wage, and access initially to regional markets in neighboring countries that then led to the entry of a very lucrative market in the U.S. for Regani. As a result, this demonstrated to the world that Regani juice could export anywhere. In Regani's case, they were able to access markets in Hong Kong, South Korea, and Japan. As it turns out, the buyer in Japan is Costco. It's actually a U.S. export with African supply. Let that sink in for a minute. Today, with Prosper Africa, Regani trains other African companies how to utilize AGOA, and through Prosper Africa, with additional support in investing new packaging equipment that will now launch them from paper products to glass bottle exports, meeting the U.S. market demand. The success story of Regani is why AGOA exists. It's one example of how AGOA can and should work. Prosper Africa exists to replicate and scale this two-way trade and investment approach throughout the continent. AGOA is essential to two-way trade, two-way growth, and two-way prosperity. It is a critical tool to link our markets in ways that advance mutual strategic goals, diversifying supply chains, increasing Africa's local capacity, and advancing shared objectives. AGOA remains a critical job creator, both in the U.S. and in Africa, as I just mentioned. In order to support the success of AGOA, we focus on both supply and demand. On the supply side, we grow and capacitate African suppliers that are matched with qualified U.S. buyers through grants, investment facilitation, aggregation, and other trade services. On the demand side, we grow the number and market share of U.S. buyers looking to source competitive products from Africa. This is increasingly important as the world faces supply shortages from conflict, pandemics, and capacity gaps. This means creating greater awareness of AGOA. Currently, we have 819 deals in Prosper Africa's supply pipeline, valued at $1.2 billion US dollars, of which the majority are in the agriculture and apparel sectors, as well as the critical mineral sector, representing 8% of this pipeline and growing. We know that Africa is poised for economic growth, and AGOA is a part of that story. And America wants to be a part of that story and part of Africa's story, and that's why Prosper Africa exists. We believe we should all prosper, America and Africa together. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I assume you brought us all the juice, Regani juice. Oh, sorry, where's the credit card machine? We've been told we have to swipe our credit cards by the minister. So yeah, obviously a really inspirational a story and showing it works. And I think thanks for sharing that real story and bringing us all juice to buy. Thank you. So maybe moving on to Greg. Obviously the textile industry has had an interesting journey with the US. Okay? So maybe just tell us your journey with the textile industry and how AGOA has assisted to create opportunities for business, and where do you think that should be going forward with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement?
Okay, thanks, Dwayne. Thanks for being here. I'm Greg Poole, Special Advisor to our CEO on supply chain issues. So, Children's Place, specialty retailer in North America. Today, we're operating over 500 retail outlets in North America, and we have annual sales of $1.7 billion US. We have been sourcing in Africa for some time now, but in 2015, we made a concerted effort to grow and develop our sourcing in Africa. And it's been an incredible story for us, one of huge success. And today, Africa represents now 30% of our source volume. We're working in 7 African countries across both the East and the West. And I would say we've only just begun. The opportunity in Africa is really significant. And, you know, when I think about the evolution of industry, the textile and apparel industry is a great entry point for companies to develop and to grow. And so, you know, you think about textile and apparel exports from Africa in 2022 was $1.4 billion. Okay? But yet, a country like Bangladesh exported $42 billion. So this opportunity for Africa is really, really significant. And couple that with the population growth that is expected by 2050, there's a perfect matchup for our industry and creating high quality jobs to allow people to enter the workforce. So from that standpoint, it's really been terrific. But we need to encourage more retailers and brands and manufacturers to come to Africa. For some reason, there is a lack of awareness from my perspective. I'm trying to tell this story to my colleagues, trying to encourage them to come and see what's possible. And I encourage you all to engage them as well, because once you come here and actually see it, it is some of the best textile and apparel manufacturing capabilities in the world. And so I really feel like we can grow that. But to get more investment to come, and that investment that exists to remain, we need AGOA to be renewed, and we need it to be renewed now. And if it doesn't happen, I have a great fear that hundreds of thousands of people, the majority of them whom are young women, will lose their jobs. And none of us want that to occur. So I encourage you all to do whatever we can to renew and extend AGOA as quickly as we possibly can. Thank you. Please.
Thanks, Greg. I mean, obviously just shows you AGOA makes a difference, but you put the challenge out there. If we don't renew it, there's a risk as well, but also a really great growth opportunity that you're articulating. So thanks for that. So moving on to Kenny from the banker, and who's obviously now going to be challenged to finance this expansion that Greg has said to him that's coming. So maybe can just reflect on the successes and the challenges that AGOA as a bank have put to you. So we just reflect on all those successes and challenges as a bank, and as you're seeing working with your clients across Africa.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Dwayne. I'm not going to repeat some of the high-level benefits that have already been well articulated by different speakers, including the minister. But I will reflect on some of the additional benefits that sometimes are not noticed and are never spoken about. We operate in 20 African countries, and consequently, we support our clients, whether it is with regard to their funding requirements or taking them to the capital market to raise capital and tap into other investor pools. And one of the key requirements that we look at and that investors would look at is the sort of sustainability of the revenues of those companies. And being able to access the U.S. market by African companies that produce and export is such a powerful thing, because it effectively means, firstly, that their revenue streams are well diversified, and therefore the risk of short-term economic shocks in one localized geography is mitigated through having access to a far more bigger market that is much more stable. And secondly, the additional benefit is access to foreign currency earnings. Again, we take that for granted when you are operating a company in the U.S., because currency fluctuation and currency risk does not exist in your vocab. But when you are an African company that relies, in some instances, on imports for machinery and equipment, and countries that are dependent on major imports for a whole range of other goods and services, foreign currency earning is so critical to the sustainability of those companies and those economies. AGOA provides an avenue for companies to earn more foreign currency and consequently to mitigate their own revenue streams, and consequently also help those economies have foreign currency benefits. And you can see it with probably companies that have been able to weather the storms as we look at the economic shocks that have been experienced by many of the African countries in the last couple of years. I suspect the fluctuation in the mic is deliberately done because they think I'll do a Dwayne on them and deliver a long speech. I'm not going to do that. Thank you.
We've still got a bit of time. They're trying to meet the banker. Is that the story? Not meet the accountant.
All right, let me reflect on then. You spoke about the challenges. I think there are a number of challenges, there's no doubt about it. I think it's absolutely useful that there has to be rules and conditionality associated with AGOA, because we want to make sure that the goods that are produced are of the right quality and standard, and we also want to make sure that the countries behave in a particular manner. But in there lies the risk of punitive penalties on the actual companies, employees, and real beneficiaries of AGOA for sins that are committed by governments and individuals who decide to take over power when they have nothing to do with the actual production of goods and so on. So we think some of those ought to be modified so that ultimately there's a relative weighing of who are the actual beneficiaries, what are the impacts of the consequential removal of AGOA in the event that countries do not comply. And somehow those can be modified in a manner that mitigates some of the risks that are intended or that tend to be associated with the removal of countries and the isolation and so forth and so on. I think the second challenges relates to issues that are inherent within the African countries. And this is the point that Cass made exceptionally well. AGOA is an agreement that seeks to create a regulatory environment, a taxing environment that enables companies to export with relative ease to the U.S. and to be competitive when they do so. But you need to have goods and services to export in the first instance. And that has nothing to do with AGOA. It has to do with whether we have the right investment, we have the right skills, you have the logistical infrastructure to take those goods to the post. Is that infrastructure and its own functioning competitive? Can you produce your goods on a sustainable basis? And I think those are internal constraints that we also have to attend to as African countries and as African companies, because AGOA can be as favorable as it can be, can effectively create a whole range of new opportunities. If at the end of the day we cannot produce quality products, we can't move them to the ports, and we can't do so on a sustainable basis, we would not be able to take full advantage of the benefits that AGOA offers. And you can see it in the statistics, which countries are taking full advantage, which sectors, which industries, and which companies. And I suspect that the biggest reason as to why we're not seeing the full benefit expanded to all the countries that could benefit has to do more with the internal constraints as opposed to the external constraints because of the restrictions of AGOA. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Kenny. So moving on to Nswalo from Pfizer. Pfizer, a really large multinational pharmaceutical company. And the pharmaceutical supply chain has been identified as a priority for the AU and for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Pfizer has made significant investments and tech transfers to help increase local production across Africa. How can the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and the other African Union agencies help to support increased trade and investment in pharmaceuticals?
Thank you, Dwayne. And I think, I echo some of the sentiments that some of the panelists and speakers that we had earlier have already shared. But I think just as a starting point, maybe if I could just say a little bit about what Pfizer does. I know you've already spoken around the fact that we are a world premier innovative pharmaceutical company. And I think post-COVID, sometimes I find it difficult to just talk about Pfizer because I think that sort of put us on the map. Because even little kids now know that Pfizer, the vaccine, the COVID vaccines people. But I think beyond that, there's a lot that we do. And we truly pride ourselves in investing in research and development that truly bring therapies across, that brings medicines and vaccines across various therapeutic areas, ranging from oncology to immunology, as well as rare diseases, as well as vaccines, notably our PCV13, which is normally used to vaccinate against pneumococcal diseases in children under 5, as well as high-risk adults as well. And our Comirnaty vaccine, which is the COVID-19 vaccine, which I also just spoke to now. So I think, but back to your point, what we have done at Pfizer, I think one of our strategies around manufacturing has always been looking at a global network so that we can leverage on economies of scale. But we've also been very consistent in finding opportunities on the continent to see how we can build capacity from a local manufacturing perspective. But with that said, we also need to take note of the fact that every new local manufacturing project usually means that the cost of goods increase quite substantially. So sometimes it's more cost effective to sort of look at models where you have fewer facilities that can produce products at lower costs or cost of goods that you can then export to other markets. And I think from our perspective as well, I think some of those have already been spoken to around policy certainty, which remains quite a key gap in South Africa, but I think across the continent as well. And one of the things that we think, obviously, around how we could advance investment and trade from also a pharmaceutical perspective is looking at removing some of those trade and regulatory barriers. And I think Kenny spoke to some of them. And I think this whole thing around trade barriers and regulatory barriers is not only unique to the pharmaceutical sector, but I've heard in various discussions and various forums as well that it's really a challenge that is faced by multiple sectors as well. And I think currently for us talking about the AFCFTA and the role they could play from that perspective, I think if you look at us currently, if we've got products that we want to bring into the African markets, you really have to find individual market authorizations as well as export permits from different and respective countries, which require their own respective local standards. So finding a coherent way to align all those, removing those challenges from individual standards, working also with the African Medicines Agency, and I believe there's been some great strides that have been made in that regard, where we've learned that obviously AMA has now been established. They're just looking into how they can now operationalize it. And I think it will play quite a critical role from a global health security perspective, but also ensuring that, because if we have to constantly look at meeting individual standards, it also prohibits access to medicine, as well as looking at economies of scale. So it sort of defeats that purpose. And I think one other thing that we've also looked at is how do we then advance the harmonization as well from a WHO pre-qualification, which also has its own requirements in terms of sometimes it inhibits market access to various products. But notwithstanding some of those challenges, I think everybody that's gathered here in the room, from private sectors, civil society, as well as governments, we all have sort of one common goal to see how we can advance, be it access to healthcare or the products that we make on the African continent. So we really need to just come together to see how we find what I call Afro-global solutions that will truly serve the continent and the people that we truly seek to aspire. But also from a Pfizer's perspective, I think we are committed and we welcome the opportunity. We've always been transparent to working with U.S. government, as well as the AU, as well as Africa member states, and we've had some great engagements as well with the AFCFTA Secretariat, with His Excellency Mene and his colleagues as well, in terms of how we can begin to make some of those amends in looking at how we can look at policy frameworks that truly are sustainable, as well as looking into procurement mechanisms that truly support localization. Because one thing that I think people need to take cognizance of is that we do support local manufacturing. We do look at how we can build capacity as well as scale around that. But there needs to be cognizant from a procurement perspective that locally produced goods normally are not the most cheapest that you would have available. So how do governments start looking at more the longer term value, as well as some of the benefits that they will get economically and in the long term from investing and having policies that support investments in that regard.
Thanks for sharing those thoughts. I think what is clear is that there's strong dialogue, and dialogue matters in platforms like this, with whether it's the FTA Secretariat, the AU. It looks like there's lots of progress being made. Yeah. So moving on to Cecilia. So Cecilia is representing AmCham and Dow, a rather large American chemical company. So I think maybe my question to you, maybe we're wearing both hats, is what can Africa and the US do to accelerate manufacturing in Africa? Maybe some of your thoughts around that.
Thank you, Dwayne, and thanks for the opportunity. I'm going to use the platform to quickly speak about AmCham. For those of you who have not seen this pamphlet, about 600 American companies call South African home, right? That's significant. We talk about 12% contribution to the GDP of South Africa, and of course a much larger contingent on the continent itself, right? So very proud to represent the American Chamber of Commerce, and also one big US company. And your tie, thanks, that's great, Dean. As AmCham, our mandate is to be the voice of US business here and vice versa. Our members see us as a trusted partner. They see us as a Pan-African connector. And we do welcome progress that has been made. I think about the December U.S. Africa Leader Summit and that collective African strategy, that was designed there. Even Kendra's here from the President's Advisory Council on doing business in Africa. So all of these efforts are there. But for us to really advance manufacturing, I think my first point of call would be to draw on our collective strengths. The minister referred to critical minerals, and it's a sexy topic because it enables the green economy, right? Electric vehicles, batteries, everything. But out of the 50 list of most critical minerals listed in the US, Africa provides 25 of them. There's a collective strength that we should be drawing on, and there are markets that we should be accelerating beyond regulatory boundaries that we were speaking about. And some of those, those constraints, we don't want to be regulated to such an extent that it inhibits these collective strengths. And I think aligned to that, increased access to trade markets. Many examples of good markets, automotive, industry, textile and apparel, those are good. Where's healthcare, for example? It would be good to have more success stories across many more trade markets. And then I come back to an enabling environment locally. And I want to just point out, a few of our colleagues here from the AmCham. I've got Babongile from Coca-Cola, Peter Taylor from Citibank, Rian from PepsiCo. We are here as a voice. You'll see many of our stalls if we here supporting AGOA, because we believe that, and we really advocate for the renewal, for the success for the next 20 years. You know, a longer investment, a longer agreement is larger confidence. Confidence leads to larger investment. But also companies that are based in South Africa, if we are successful here, if the environment enables our success, then the US benefits as well. We become that flagship to the US. And I think those are the three areas where I think if we can focus on that, you know, today there's already been so many points of connection points. I think we have to identify key areas that we take forward where we work with Minister Patel. We use PAC DBIA and the CCA, and we really drive for tangible results. Thanks, Dean.
Thanks, Cecilia. So a really strong call from American AmCham to be renewing AGOA. It matters. Thanks, Cecilia. So moving on to David from Sasol, obviously a really large multinational or South African started headquartered company and still headquartered just across the road from EY's office in Sandton. So I sit and have lunch looking at their office every day. So a really fantastic office. Well done, David. But I think you've transitioned from just being a South African company to be a really global company. So I think you've really got a strong voice in saying you've been successful in America. So maybe my question to you is, how does the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, how's it going to facilitate intra-Africa trade, which we're saying currently is too low, and build a platform to take advantage of the trade opportunities that AGOA gives us? Some of your thoughts, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Dwayne. Good morning, everyone. So just touching on that, so Sasol is a South African headquartered global chemicals, integrated chemicals and energy company. We have a very strong, large footprint in Africa, although most of our operations are in the SADC region. We have operations around the world, literally around the world. We produce about 6.5 million tons of chemicals globally. They're exported to around 118 countries around the world. So truly global. For us, AGOA has a certain special place, and it goes beyond just a unilateral trade concession from the US to Africa. We see the benefits of it beyond that. We see that in reciprocal mutual trade with each other, not just one way. Sasol has invested heavily in the US. We've had a footprint in the US for a couple of decades now, but I guess the most notable one is the one recently over $12 billion in a multi-asset chemical manufacturing facility in Louisiana. But we have facilities elsewhere in the US. A very strong player in that region. What AGOA does, it helps us to further enhance and integrate the value chains between South Africa and the US. So we have high-value chemicals that we take out of Secunda and Sasolburg facilities, send them to the US. Some of them are even beneficiated in the US and sent on. And considering where that value chain begins, some of it begins in Mozambique. So it's truly a regional integration story. We take natural gas from Mozambique, bring it into our facilities, is one of our key feedstocks. And we process that, and it results into a range of chemicals, and then they get exported globally. So it's a very good model. Some of it was done outside of AGOA. Everything is not just done inside of AGOA, but certainly the existence of AGOA and coming into fruition, the African Free Trade Agreement is certainly set to trigger and spur those value chains even further. We certainly believe that countries on their own individually are not the strongest, but it is when we have these multilateral blocks, if you like, which leverages the competencies, resources, the geography, and all the strengths of countries in these blocks, and we organize ourselves so that we can then better take advantage of the trade opportunities with the US and the rest of the world. Individual countries can't do it alone. So we partner very, very strongly across the continent. We have relationships. We have a very strong footprint. So we think that the advent of the African FTA and synchronizing that, or it can leapfrog many of the South African value chains into the global arena. This continent is endowed with renewables. We all talk about that, and I believe AGOA could also help to help the continent take advantage of, for example, the IRA, the moves there, and so on. So I do, however, think when that intra-Africa trade is almost an imperative. It is mandatory. We have to trade Africa amongst ourselves, lift the game, so that we can then step into the wider world. This thing of we all want to trade internationally, but we don't trade with ourselves. Our borders are way too thick, way too thick. Countries that are geographically proximate with each other don't trade because it's just so difficult to trade with each other. So really, this is an advent of a new era when the African Union can get the African Free Trade Agreement really fully implemented, that can harmonize the processes. You need bureaucracy, but you need good bureaucracy. You need bureaucracy that is consistent, not bureaucracy that is haphazard, nobody knows the rules. If you know the rules, you follow the rules, you know what the outcome will be. That's good bureaucracy. You need it. So we need to harmonize these things so that we have a set of rules and systems and processes and so on, so that you know if you do A, B, C, you get an outcome. It's predictable, it works. So those are my comments.
Thanks very much. I mean, I think it's really highlighting that partnerships matter, and partnerships do exist across Africa, and regional value chains have been created. So, yeah, thanks for setting an example there. Maybe moving on to Tobo on the representing the oldest customs union in the world. Can you briefly share with us the strategy of the customs union as a regional economic community of 5 countries? And just talk to us about and how does that relate to the relevance of AGOA? Does AGOA matter to SACU?
Thank you, Dwayne, and good morning, everyone, and fellow panelists. Yes, SACU is indeed the oldest customs union in the world, dating as far back as 1910. And I'll take the cue from my fellow panelists here, also just to share with you, as in fact you have asked me to do, Dwayne, what we are, but most importantly, what we seek to achieve. SACU is the 5 member states, South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho. They are a customs union, which means really you have free movement of goods, tariff-free within the region, and capital also. Now, the strategy of SACU is underpinned by a desire to achieve prosperity for the member states, for the citizens of the member states. That's first and foremost what really underpins what the 5 member states seek to achieve. But this is to be achieved through industrialization. And industrialization that obviously is to be pursued through export promotion, investment promotion, the whole idea that we've been talking about here of building regional value chains within the customs union. There is also a specific strategic intent to leverage on the AFCFTA opportunity for the 5 member states so that they in some way become the lead, they leverage and take full of an advantage of that setup. And clearly the moment I said this, Dwayne, already we're addressing a point that you yourself raised earlier about the multiplicity of regional bodies in the region. And I think we've just had even now David alluding to the need for, yes, have bureaucracy, but bureaucracy that's helpful. Let's also standardize. I think Tinzwalo talked about that from a private sector point of view, that they find themselves having to jump over a number of hoops over in trading in Africa, where you find a lot of regulatory systems, each requiring you to, file different, license applications and all that. And then when it comes to customs compliance, when you are moving your goods around the region, it's a big problem. And therefore, the idea of also focusing on trade facilitation and logistics as part of the strategy is high up on the agenda to make sure that we really deal with the supply side constraints. It's one thing to have soft infrastructure, the rules, the bureaucracy clarified, and I dare say in this regard that one of the programs we've been running is an economic operator program for the SACU member states, where they've now agreed to standardizing a process for accredited businesses to trade seamlessly in the entire SACU region, so that if the customs administration in Botswana has accredited you as compliant following some extensive audit, automatically that translates to an accreditation in South Africa, in Eswatini, in Lesotho. Just by complying to one, you're compliant in the region. That's a program that we've been pushing recently in the whole of the SACU region. We are now thinking of a SACU East African Community Initiative, where we now combine the two programs and we have a mutual recognition agreement, where now it actually increases the number of countries to which it applies. And if you are SASO, or you are any company really moving goods around the region, you know that all you have to do, I'm based in Namibia, get compliance in Namibia, demonstrate that you have audit systems, audit trail, good track record in terms of tax compliance. Once you do that and you are accredited in Namibia as a Namibian business, then you'll be able to trade across the whole of SACU all the way to East Africa, based on such a model. So this is part of the soft infrastructure that we're building. But be that as it may, there is also the hard infrastructure part, which is now the need for roads, infrastructure, the need for ports, whether it be seaports or airports, one-stop border facilitation, sort of infrastructure. All these are part of the strategies of SACU, intended, of course, to feed into the ultimate objective of industrializing the region and therefore benefiting the citizens through achieving sustainable development. Now, how does AGOA fit in this regard? Now, AGOA is premised on the idea of export-led growth. The theme of this session is now, how do we now change the role of AGOA in that regard? And I think it's about reflecting back, as Minister Patel did say, let's look back. How do we build on what we have achieved in order to maybe make sure that we take it to the next level? It's not just another renewal, as you say. And in this regard, the thinking that we're having as SACU is that, and I've had this theme come out prominently even here in this panel, and even the speeches that were had this morning, that it's time that we started maybe focusing more about, taking it to this next level. And for us, really, it's a matter of looking at the value-added type of industrialization. A lot has been said about the extractive industry and the role that it can play, and it is part of the mix without a doubt. But there's a need now to do beneficiation, that has been said. But even when you get to manufacturing, it's high time that perhaps we started thinking also about what it is that we are manufacturing, in terms of its complexity, in terms of the knowledge content in whatever that we manufacture and produce and export. Because what is very clear is that the higher the knowledge content, and this is evidence from development economics, that rich countries like Germany, Japan, really, if you look at them, what's unique about their export basket is the knowledge content of that export basket. To the extent that then it reflects into higher labor productivity. The people who produce those become more productive. 1 hour of labor producing cocoa vis-a-vis 1 hour of labor producing the drugs of Pfizer. Still 1 hour of labor, but the labor productivity is higher. Therefore, the incomes that are derived from producing this higher value-added product are actually more beneficial to development and prosperity. So what am I saying? What I'm saying when all is said and done is that perhaps it's time for AGOA to seriously consider integrating as part of the next agreement an element of developing the technical know-how, the element of supporting the African countries to move higher in terms of the value-added sort of strata, so that increasingly we start monitoring ourselves intentionally with what is the basket that Africa exports to the US? What is the knowledge content in it? Now, does it mean we're going to do away with the low value added? Absolutely not. It's a spectrum. You start somewhere and you start building on it. So we still need small and medium enterprises. We still need the simple, basic commodities being part of the mix. However, we need to now start saying, how do we deliberately get the likes of Sasol, for example, who are saying they are exporting, in fact, manufacturing in the US, high value-added chemicals, a high sort of value-added content product, which clearly means the developmental impact is much higher. So that's basically, I think, the role that we foresee for SACU. That's a view that we have, and that's the contribution that we would like to make in terms of now shaping the new AGOA. Thank you.
Thanks, Toby. As we bring it to a close, I'll just ask all the panelists just to give their last thoughts. And Tinswala, I'll start with yourself and just go down the panelists around just your closing remarks around, is there an AGOA Plus? What should we be thinking about to make sure we want to secure AGOA and make it bigger and stronger than ever before?
Thanks, Dwayne. So I think we are all committed, right, to making sure that the AGOA gets renewed. And I think from our perspective, it's things that have been echoed here before around regulatory harmonization, removing those trade barriers, and looking at how the policy environment needs to be one that enables private companies to be able to come and invest on the continent. So policy certainty remains a key component, as well as looking at governments also needs to see how they work with private sectors as well, to make sure that even within their own structures, there's sort of intergovernmental coordination, because sometimes you meet with Minister Pastel and he totally understands and he's committed to sort of local manufacturing. But then on the other hand, when you've got the Department of Health, that's maybe just looking at the cost of goods without understanding in terms of some of the economic impacts of it, that contributes to that. It sort of defeats the purpose in terms of attracting investments into the continent. So I think AGOA has a critical place to play in that from that perspective as well as us working with the AFCFTA Secretariat to see how we can support. And I think from a pharmaceutical perspective or healthcare perspective, the African Medicines Agency will remain a critical component in ensuring that access to medicines is faster or accessible rather on the continent.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I think I wanted to echo Thabo's thoughts about building the local value chains, and we need AGOA to encourage the building of those value chains. So for our industry, I'm talking about building of textile processing facilities. So Africa grows 6% of the world's cotton, yet the majority of that cotton is exported to Asia. So there's a real opportunity to build that infrastructure. Some of it's being built now, but we need a lot more scale. And so if we could encourage that infrastructure to be built, that will also promote inter-Africa trade, allowing raw materials to move from one African country to another to support greater trade, greater exports. So if we can just encourage that, I think it would be good. But we need a long-term and early renewal to encourage more investment.
Thanks very much, Greg. Cecilia, your closing comments?
Dwayne, just to say that, of course, AGOA Plus, yes, we are absolutely committed to that. But I think AGOA is a tool, right? And it's up to us how we utilize it, how we improve, and how we maximize. And I think there's internal things within countries, within Africa as a continent, and then there's external in our relations with the US and how we think about different aspects of how we optimize that. We need to get going and show tangible increases and really focus on key items that will drive the relationship further.
Thanks, Cecilia. David, your closing comments on?
Yeah, I think my closing comments are really the way we look at the current renewal process. I think we need to, absolutely we support that, but more importantly, we need to look beyond the current renewal. We cannot be sitting here every couple of years saying, oh, this must be renewed. So AGOA Plus, but for me what AGOA Plus means is building the resilience in the industrialization and value chains in Africa. What do we do beyond that? So we should love AGOA or utilize AGOA as if it is not permanent, as if it will come to an end, and use it fully to build our own capabilities so that we can move forward. Otherwise, we're just relying on AGOA for how long? So it's good, but I think we have to build robustness and resilience beyond the current or the future AGOA dispensations.
Yeah, thanks, David. Kenny, your closing comments?
Just 2 points, Dwayne. I think the first is that Africa has been talking about industrialization for decades. But as we all know, things do not happen just because we talk about them or make pronouncements. Things happen because the necessary conditions are created and the right initiative and there's execution at the back of that. I think we need to focus on dealing and removing the obstacles that have prevented countries from accelerating and taking advantage of AGOA. And in so doing, we have to think of AGOA as a stimulus. On its own, it is not the sum total of the economic activity of our countries. It is not the sum total of the job opportunity and the improvement of the quality of lives of the people of Africa. But it can be a catalyst that can be critical in removing those obstacles and blockages. And a lot of those, I think, are internal, as has already been mentioned. So we need to own up as Africans to our own goals and try and remove those. I think the second point is really to also dial up the business-to-business interaction in AGOA. AGOA is a government-to-government negotiation and agreement on the rules, but it is businesses that produce goods. It is businesses that buy from other businesses within the African continent. I think we need to get those connections dialed up and also ensure that they are engineered, they are facilitated, and where there's a need for other agencies within the US and within the African continent to aid that process, be deliberate in getting those plugged into those activities and into those value chains. I think if we do those 2 things right, then we'll have AGOA Plus in the true sense of the word.
And Thabo, final word from you.
Thank you, Dwayne. Yes, for me, really, I think the point I wanted to make, maybe as a final point, is the fact that if you look at, in fact, what AGOA is an opportunity act. And for me, I want to underline the word opportunity. The window of opportunity is open, has been open since 2000, May 2000. But it's bound to close, and I think I like how, in fact, David was actually saying, let's think of it as an opportunity that's open, but it will close. But to the extent that it's really an opportunity, I think it says we need to make sure that we take advantage of it. We leverage on it. But that means we need to reflect and say what hasn't worked up to now, and therefore what will work. The way I see it as I conclude is that the AFCFTA opportunity, exciting as it is, there is one inherent, I think, trap there that we need to be aware of. There's an excitement about each of the 55 countries that they're going to take advantage of AFCFTA and export to the other African countries and have a trade surplus against them. Now, if we are 55 and we're all, hoping for a surplus against each other, it doesn't add up. Because for a surplus, there has to be a deficit, You can't just all have surpluses against all 55 of yourselves. Which therefore means inherently there has to be a third party who needs to infuse some element of maybe a deficit in order to allow us to leverage on the benefits of trade. And for me, this is where AGOA fits in. This is where the US for Africa fits into the bigger picture, so that we can trade amongst ourselves, but then leverage on this relationship where, in fact, SACU member states, as of recent, have actually enjoyed a trade surplus against the US collectively since 2017. And that means, therefore, the US is actually becoming a force for good. It's actually enabling AFCFTA because now an African country, South Africa, can actually have a deficit with another African country and export perhaps less than it imports, help that country grow, knowing very well that it will then leverage on the bigger partner like the US, the biggest market in the world, to then enable AFCFTA to happen. Thank you.
So I think there's a real challenge put to all of us, all to business and to government, is AGOA needs to be extended, but we need to be thinking beyond AGOA. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement, I think, creates a great opportunity for African businesses to work together to create that opportunity over the next years. So really thanks to all the panelists, thanks for all your attention, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.